Hello and welcome to this latest episode of Mersey Synod in Conversation With. And in this episode, I'm really pleased to be talking to Geoff Felton, who I hope most of you will know as the Synod moderator, and also to Louise Franklin, who today is here to represent that group of people who think about mission and discipleship in the Synod. So it's really good to have both of you with me. I'm really looking forward
Thank you,
to
Stuart.
really looking
Thank
to
you.
our conversation where we're going to be thinking about how we talk faith. Talking faith, I hope that lots of you will know, is the theme for the Synod this year. So perhaps, Geoff, that's a really good place to start. Why does the Synod even need a theme? What do you think is important about having a theme for our year?
I think, Stuart, that's a really good question. So, if we've got a theme for the synod, it gives us a bit of a structure to kind of build our mission around and to build our synod life around and such like. But there's two other reasons as well. Hopefully, it will help local churches to feel like they're part of something bigger, so they're not just kind of ploughing their own furrow, on their own and doing
Absolutely.
their own thing. And then I think the final one for me really is it helps us to look beyond our own kind of part of the world and God's mission and that, and it helps us to look outwards when we're kind of given the idea of a theme to be thinking about. So they're a couple of the ideas really why we need a theme to our synod
Mhm.
year.
So as I've mentioned, our theme for this year is talking faith. Louise, perhaps you could just jump in now and say, talking faith. What does that even mean to us?
I think we were very much aware, particularly within the Mission and Discipleship Committee, which I represent, that this is something that lots of people in local churches struggle with. How to talk about their faith in Jesus in normal, everyday situations. Lots of people tell us that actually, evangelism, for want of a better word, is something that Christians really struggle with. So we wanted to help people um, be a bit more courageous and a bit more proactive in how they talk about their faith. And we wanted to kind of take away the sting out of it and not to make it the big, scary thing that some people think it is, but enable people and equip people to do that naturally and with a bit more courage and confidence. So, everybody needs to be talking about their faith. And we want to encourage every local church and every person within our local churches to do that well.
And I hear that, Louise, but I mean, quite often I've spoken to people outside of the church, and I've heard it from people inside the church who say, never talk about religion and politics at the dinner table. And there's very much this attitude that I think goes through the church as well that says, well, faith is just a personal thing. It's not something to be shared.
No, no, no,
What's
no,
your
no, no.
thoughts on that then?
Faith isn't a personal thing. Oh, well, but faith may be a personal thing, but it's not a private thing.
Right.
Our faith is owned personally, but it's not to be kept personally. It's not private, and nobody is meant to share it. Nowhere in the Gospels does Jesus say, "Well, just keep this to yourself, everybody. Do not share this with anybody." It's personal. It may mean something to each one of us, but it's not private, and it's only to be kept to ourselves. Our faith is meant to be shared and spread.
So, Geoff, perhaps you could just elaborate on that a little bit and just kind of think with what Louise has said, would you like to just expand on why sharing our faith matters? Not just to the church, but to the sense of faith itself.
I think, Stuart, it's really important to understand that faith is not just a political concept or a philosophical idea. We actually believe that our faith is about truth and it's about transformation. And as such, if we've discovered that, there should be something within us that wants to kind of give that away and kind of share it and help others to discover that for themselves. So for me, this idea of faith being a personal thing, I'd go along with what Louise has said. To a certain extent, it is a personal thing, but it's also a corporate and a relational thing, because it has to be lived out in the public domain. If we have a faith, we have to live that, and when we live that, we share that with other people. But what we're thinking about specifically this year is about articulating that through the language and the words that we use, not just through the actions that we have. And I believe that our faith can help us to understand the deepest questions of life. So there's the whole thing about who is Jesus? Why did Jesus come? Was he a historical figure? Was he a mythical figure? If he was historical, then who was he? What did the things he say, do they add up? Do they make sense? But the Christian faith as well helps us to understand things about the depth of life. So when we ask questions like, who am I and why am I here? And where is life heading? I believe that the Christian faith speaks into those things. And that when people ask those questions, we really listen to them, we can help them to understand that we're not just a kind of a load of cells and DNA that is kind of evolving into, eventually to death, but actually we're people who are known, loved, forgiven, and can live with a relationship with God now. And so that is something that I don't want to keep to myself, because I honestly believe that actually it's the meaning of life, and I want to share that with other people.
And I love what you say there, and it really appeals to me. But I wonder, for a lot of people, is it a case of being able to say that confidently? And I wonder, have you got any ideas about how we can build our confidence up in sharing what you've said, or in the way that we want to say it, but sharing that with others? How do we build our confidence so that we, does either one of you have a thought about that?
I would say to that, Stuart, I think it's really important that we begin by listening to people, because sometimes we can kind of rehearse, what am I going to say, and just kind of blurt something out without actually listening to what people's questions are and what's going on in their heart. And it's really important that we hear people and that we listen to people before we kind of speak to them and share our thinking. But I think it's even more important these days, because recently there was a survey produced saying that the Christian faith is less and less important for people in our country. And as the Christian narrative is spoken less and less in our culture, people are less and less aware of it. So it's more important now for the church to be speaking up and talking faith than it has been for years and years, because it's always been a part of the fabric of the DNA of our culture, or it has been, in recent years. But now that it's less and less so, it's more important, I believe, for us as church and as Christians to talk faith to those around us, so we can present a different story, and a story that brings hope and life to people.
I know for myself, Louise, there's been times when you think, well, I'd love to talk faith to somebody, but what happens when they come back and they ask me that really difficult question that I don't know the answer to? How do we get past that? And I guess it's a real fear for people, isn't it? In two senses: either I don't want to look stupid in that moment because I don't know what the fifth book of the Old Testament is, or I don't have the answer to why their best friend's child tragically died in a car accident or whatever. How do we, and I perhaps recognise that we're not going to get the catch-all answer off you now, but how do we start to move past that sense of fear into a place where our faith does become more openly shared with other people?
And I think the key is what Geoff said. Is about listening, and I think, if somebody's had a tragedy, like why has my child died, I don't think what they need at that moment is a theological answer. Often that may come. I think they want to know that their child is loved, and that they're loved, and that God is with them. I think, no, trolling out a long pat theological answer isn't helpful at that moment. But sometimes we're asked questions that we don't know the answer to, and it's okay to say, well, actually, I haven't worked that out fully for myself. Let me think about it, and I'm going to come back to you. And that gives you a follow-up to, another conversation. And sometimes I think people ask questions and they don't actually want to know the answer to the question. It's just about the conversation, or about kind of testing you, or working out, what do you really think? Sometimes it's not. It's more about the conversation rather than the answer. And I guess that from your relationship with whoever's asking that question.
And I think that's really good, what Louise has just said about it's not necessarily the answer, it's the conversation. Because I think when difficult questions are asked, and if we don't have the answers, I think honesty is really important. And I think people respect that. So rather than trotting out some trite answer that trips off the tongue, just be honest and say, I'm still working that on myself. Or, I've never thought of it like that. I don't know, but I can go away and have a look into it for you. So honesty, I think, is really important there.
And I'm kind of thinking about those faith conversations as well. I'm reminded of the story of the minister, let's say, who was talking to a group of children and says, "Can anybody tell me what's red with a big fluffy tail and eats nuts?" And the child says, "I know the answer is Jesus, but it sounds a bit like a squirrel to me." Does every conversation that we have actually have to lead to a conversation about faith?
Again, I guess it's context, isn't it? I was having my blood taken the other day at the nurse, and she was telling me about what bad week she'd had, and my car had just broken down outside the garage where it's mended. Praise God. And I said, she said, "Well, that's luck." And I said, "Well, I actually don't believe in luck. I think that was God." And we had this fantastic conversation about how did God cause your car to break down? I said, "Well," so we had a great conversation. It didn't lead anywhere in particular, but it was a faith-based conversation. And I think sometimes we try to shoehorn faith-based conversations into conversations that don't actually have to have faith in it. And that makes us look like weird religious nuts. But I think natural conversations sometimes may lead to faith, sometimes may not. But if we're trying to kind of shoehorn and make something fit to get my 3 points all beginning with the same letter into the conversation, then that actually isn't helpful and doesn't come out of listening, or doesn't come out of authentic relationship.
I think that's really helpful. So, I think what I'm picking up at the moment is that listening is one of the most important things we can do. I'm reminded of somebody told me once that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a very good reason. So listening is really important. And I guess the story you just shared with us about talking to your nurse helps us to think, what experience have you both found of ways to talk about faith in that natural, are there any kind of formulas, or is it just a case of listening to the opportunities?
I think the minute we start adding formulas to this is the minute it becomes false, and it's no longer a real thing. So I think a lot of it has to come from who you are and the way that you live your life, and causing people to question the way that you live your life, and why you do what you do the way that you do it. But I'll be honest with you, Stuart, for me, it's usually quite easy because I'm a professional Christian. And one of the first questions that people ask me when I meet them is, "What do you do?" And so I either say to them, "I work in the supernatural," and that kind of starts a conversation, or I just say, I work for the church. I'm a minister in the church, and that the conversation can kind of go all kinds of ways. Then when you throw that in. So in a way, I've kind of got it a little bit easier because I do this it's my life, and I work for the church. But it's great when conversations do happen and they're sort of just on the hoof and people are interested and want to know about what you believe and why you believe it.
So I think next to the fear of not having the right answer, I guess people's second fear is that they will just be rejected, that people won't be receptive. What would you both say has been your experience? You talked about the nurse earlier, Louise. What would you say is your experience when you do talk to people about faith? Are they receptive, or are they just wanting to finish what they're doing and move on as quick as they can?
I mean, not everybody is going to be receptive. There are going to be some that aren't. But I guess if you are having a conversation where you haven't shoehorned something into the conversation, then people are more likely to be receptive. I found that if someone's telling you, they're having a hard time or life is difficult, I have found that if you say, "Can I pray for you?" I have never yet had somebody say no. In every opportunity, in the supermarket or something, people never seem to say no to that. I don't know if more people believe in prayer than we think, or people are hedging their bets. I don't know, but I've never had anybody turn down the offer of prayer. Not everybody wants to be prayed for there and then, but most people will say yes to being prayed for, which gives me the impression that people are more receptive to things of faith, maybe at a gentler level than we think.
And I think that's really encouraging for us all to hear. And I hope takes away some of the fear that people might be experiencing. I guess for both of you then, is there a time that you can remember where you've talked faith and you've been really, in a positive way, surprised by the outcome of that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, the times when I've been surprised the most have been when I've been talking with children about faith. So I go into schools and do assemblies, and I've run kids camps and all that kind of thing. And the thing with kids is they've got no filter a lot of the time. So they ask the questions that everyone else wants the answers to, but are too scared to ask. And so, does God live in a house? That kind of thing. All those questions, which we kind of think of, well, that's a bit daft. But actually, they're the questions that are going around the kids' minds. So if we're going to listen and be authentic, we have to give them time and help them to understand and discover who God is, and and what God means and what faith means. So I think it's usually, not exclusively, but I'm surprised when I kind of speak to and listen to kids, they come out with some crazy stuff that's just fantastic and really challenging as well.
Louise, anything that springs to mind for you?
I'm always, I love those conversations when people find out that you're a minister and they're not what they're expecting of you. And because people have a very definite view of what the church is like, because maybe they went, 3 decades ago, or maybe they've had a difficult experience of church. And I love those conversations where you have, when people go, "Oh, you're not exactly what I'm expecting," and then that enables a whole different conversation about, well, maybe church isn't what you were expecting, or
I
maybe.
would say, Louise, I think that's important for everybody to remember, that people sometimes have fixed ideas of what Christians are, and then when they find out that you're a Christian but you don't fit that fixed expectation they have, that opens doors that were previously shut. And perhaps we need to rely on who God has created in each one of us to be the door that opens faith for other people. So thinking about people who open doors by talking faith, can you think, and there's I mentioned what I said earlier, I know it sounds like a squirrel, but I'm sure the answer is Jesus. What examples, biblical examples, can you think of people who talk faith?
I love the story of the woman at the well, who at the end of the story where Jesus has told her a life, she goes away and she tells all her villagers and all her friends and all the people who've shunned her, "Come and see the man who has told me everything there is to know about me." And I love those examples of people, and shepherds did this as well. Come and see examples. Come and see, come and find out what I have just discovered for myself. I mean, you find that new Christians do that quite naturally when they've just become Christians. They do that all over the place. Come and see, come and find out, come and experience what I've just experienced. And there's loads of biblical examples of people who did that.
Anyone for you, Geoff, in particular?
Yeah, so I mean, the people I kind of think of, I'm thinking of someone like Moses, who was, he had this encounter with God in the wilderness and was then sent by God to then go and speak to the kind of the political powers of the day. And he went and he spoke and he took God's message to Pharaoh. And he was fearful and he wasn't sure. And, God had to give him a sidekick to go with him to convey that message. So he didn't leave him on his own. But I think that's an example of kind of speaking truth to power. So it's a slightly, Louise has talked about the very personal, come and see one-to-one sort of thing. But I also think the church has a role in the prophetic to be speaking truth in our culture today. And so the other person that comes to my mind is Daniel, who, found himself in this environment where he was completely alien and didn't know what Babylon was all about, been raised, in the Jewish tradition and that. And he he interacted with the culture and with the people, but at the same time, he remained true to the foundations of his faith and that. And I think that's a tightrope that we have to walk today. Is, we want to remain true to our faith, but we're not called kind of completely to not walk in our culture, but we're called to bring hope and life, to be salt and light in our culture. And for me, that's Daniel, I think, is a wonderful example of that kind of person who talked faith.
I hope I'm allowed to have two as well. My two would be, I like Jeremiah, who kind of did that the other way around, who talked faith to the faith community, who gave them the challenge about what God wanted them to be and where God wanted them to go and how God wanted them to operate. And my other one is the man in the story that we know as the Gerasene demoniac, where people remember he was possessed with evil spirits. They got sent into the pigs, so the pigs hurtled off a cliff. And at the end of this life-changing encounter with Jesus, this man says to Jesus, "Tell me what I can do. I'll do anything you want me to." And I think that moment he would have done anything Jesus asked. And Jesus said, "Go back to your community and tell them what the Lord has done for you." And I just love that as a story that's powerful for each one of us. And it doesn't say he goes back and does it with great confidence or was hugely articulate. It says just be faithful and go back and talk faith to the community that you are part of. And for me, I think that's what this year will hopefully challenge people to do, is to go and talk faith to the communities they're part of. So to help us do that a little bit, in June, on the 17th of June, at Hoole United Reformed Church in Chester, we're going to have a big Talking Faith Day. We've got a keynote speaker, a guy called Sam Ward, who works for the Message Trust, which are based over in Manchester. Sam initially started off with the Message Trust in what was called an Eden team. This was an intentional group of people who lived in a community to share the faith with the community through word and through action and from living alongside. That was a long time ago, but I was really encouraged to hear that Sam still lives in that community. He hasn't kind of moved in and moved back out again, although he's changed roles. And Sam's now the director of ministry for the Message Trust. He's going to come along and it will be a great inspiration for us as he sets us off thinking about talking faith and the way we do that in our communities. Then we have 4 workshops, and if I can't remember them all, Geoff and Louise will jump in and remind me. We're going to think about what it means to talk faith to our children and young people. We're going to think about what it means to talk faith confidently. We're going to think about what does it mean to talk faith in our everyday lives, and also that important one, what does it mean to talk faith in difficult situations? So, Geoff, perhaps, what are you most looking forward to about that particular day in June?
Stuart, I think it's going to be a great opportunity to hear ideas from a wide range of people. So some people who are experienced and confident, from people who are just coming along who may be a little bit apprehensive and aren't quite sure, how they can talk faith, people who don't know where to start. So I think I'm really excited about hearing stories of kind of what people have, how people have shared faith and talked faith from such a real wide, diverse perspective of different people.
I think you raise a really important point of that day. There is going to be space in that day for people to talk to one another, for conversations, to explore thoughts, and to stretch one another. And so, Louise, why would you really want to encourage people to be part of that day and to come along?
Because we all need to be. We all need to be. We all need to be more confident and more courageous in sharing our faith. My favourite Bible verse is 1 Peter 3:15, and it says, "Always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have, but do so with gentleness and respect." Everybody needs to be able to articulate their faith in ways that make sense to them and in ways that are helpful to others. And I would hope by the end of the day and the end of the year, because it's not just a day, this is a year-long focus, that by the end of it, we've got people who are just a little bit more confident and a little bit more courageous and are willing to try. And are just moved on a little bit in their discipleship to be a little bit more bold and a little bit more courageous in talking about the hope that they have.
Louise, that seems like a really great place to leave it. Geoff, Louise, thank you for your time. Although the moderator always wants to have a last word.
Always.
Stuart, can I just recommend a couple of books if people want to do a bit of reading?
Of course you can.
So 2 books that have really helped me to think through about talking faith. The Reason for God by Tim Keller was a fantastic book. Each chapter is a response to a letter that he's received from a member of the public. And then the second one is by C.S. Lewis, it's Mere Christianity, and that kind of presents a really good case for why the Christian faith makes sense in a world that is kind of all mixed up. So they're just 2 books I'd recommend.
Super. I think we're there. Louise and Geoff, thank you for the time. Thank you for encouraging us. Thank you for helping us to think about talking faith. And hopefully, as Louise says, over this year, we'll get the confidence to go and do that. You've been listening to the latest episode of In Conversation with Mercy Synod. I hope you found it helpful.